Morning, everyone. I always, I always feel like this is romper room. I don't know if that's a reference you get, but it's like, hey, Sue. I see Trevor. I see Len. Thanks everyone for joining. There's a few people climbing in here at various points of time. Here comes a few more. Great. I'm going to get started. This is day 5 of Media and Martech Week presented by the Alberta Magazine Publishers Association. Really grateful to them specifically for sponsoring this week. I think it's been really great. We've had some amazing conversations this week, and excited to have this one today, the last one of day 5. Not all measurement is equal. We've got a really interesting discussion for you guys today. I will say for anyone that's tuning in, absolutely, please put in questions into the chat at any point in time. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end. I'm just going to do a quick bit of a introduction here. So, as you probably have heard me say before, if you've heard me say anything before, it's the vision for the Calgary Marketing Association is to make Calgary known as a world-class marketing community. We really are doing our best to make that a reality. Conversations like this are amazing to support that vision. And so what you're going to hear about today is some really world-class marketing principles and concepts and discussion. So excited to have you all here join us. I do want to say thanks to all of our partners for this year. We really sincerely could not have these kinds of events without them. So thanks to all of them. We've got a couple of events coming up that I just wanted to plug here. The annual general meeting and social mixer presented by True Media is on April 8th. So that will be, actually, I have to change this time. It's 4 till 7. So it'll be at the Smart Technologies head office. We've got a webinar on Tuesday, April 14th at lunchtime. Can you force demand? So this is in the home building sector, which is really, really interesting. And then we've got a date, to save the date, published on our website. We're just going to get some confirmation on speakers and whatnot, and that should be going up today or Monday. So this will be May 6th in the evening. This is a panel discussion. Most likely it'll be on AI, and should be an interesting conversation. I just need to get some more details on that. But today we've got a couple of great guests here, Robert and Kuin from DAC. They're going to be talking about measurement, all things measurement. Surprise, surprise, spoiler alert. Sorry, Robert, but there's more than last click. And so really excited to have you guys here for this conversation. I'm going to go off camera, mute myself, and then I'll come back on about 1:45-ish for some Q&A. Thanks very much, and we'll talk soon.
Right. Thanks so much for the intro, Mark. I'm just trying to take control as the host now and get my presentation up on screen. How am I doing here? Can everyone see slides?
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm very excited to be here today, and especially excited to be doing this with Kuin Puvanessasingham. Kuin and I are coming up on about 10 years now of working together. And we've partnered really closely on doing these types of things for our clients over the years. Kuin is the greatest innovator I know when it comes to all things advanced analytics and AI. I see him grinning, and he's probably going to shoot me for saying that, but it's true. And my joke is that my job is basically to try and hook a wagon load of client work onto all of that enthusiasm and energy and intelligence he brings. So we make a pretty good pair, and we get this stuff done. And we're going to be talking today a little bit about how we make it real, and hopefully can help you do the same in your businesses. Kuin came up with this great subtitle for the presentation, which I think just so succinctly puts it beautifully. Question first, tool second. We're going to be talking a lot about this methodology today because over the course of these years, we've seen so many businesses try to do it the other way and not succeed at that. So businesses who think they can just make a major investment in MarTech or analytics tech stacks and that will somehow magically solve problems they have or tell them what they should be looking at. It really doesn't work that way. It's just a good way to burn money if you do that. Whereas on the other hand, if you understand exactly what you're trying to address from a question standpoint and how you're going to use that type of analysis to drive your business forward, then you can be so much more productive. So we'll be speaking today through this lens. And we know that this is a really challenging landscape because despite all of this available technology, it's actually getting harder than ever to do that kind of true purposeful media measurement. So just really understanding how media is driving the business forward and how you should allocate investments, that's becoming harder than ever for a variety of reasons. And I'm first going to talk about what some of those reasons are. One is just the increasing fragmentation in media consumption. So this is really happening across all channels. If you think about the bulk of video investment used to be in just linear television, and you could plan media around a certain number of GRPs per week and know that you were reaching your audience well. But this is now really fragmented across viewership on a number of different connected TV apps and streaming subscriptions. And not only do people tend to have between 3 and 5 of these subscriptions at the same time, but they're rotating in and out of them. So they might cancel one for a part of the year and pick up another to watch the show that they want. So it becomes very difficult to ensure the right total blended reach and frequency across all of these different channels and the efficacy that's having. As well as even on the search side, we're seeing predictions that about 25% of searches that used to be run in Google are going to be lost to alternate search experiences. So that's going to be things like ChatGPT or Perplexity, or even social searches run in TikTok. So that's a major evolution where just the behavior is fragmented, and it's going to fundamentally alter the way brands get discovered and in consequence, how we have to think about measurement. And it's also becoming increasingly difficult to prove media's impact on the business, in part as a result of this fragmentation. And it gets even more complicated when we're talking about online versus offline outcomes. So last click can be great if you are just looking to attribute e-commerce transactions that happen straight off that click. But we've seen for a lot of clients that have both an online and an offline retail presence that when they correctly measure the offline impact of media, there's probably anywhere between 3 and 7 sales happening offline for every sale that they're getting online. So the true impact to the business really requires a much broader measurement effort to be able to assess and to properly value media. As well, we want to have the same sort of accountability and measurement rigor around full funnel media as we do for what we classically think of as performance media. So every bit of media you're running should be accountable, but we want to have the right confidence to be able to take that back to the boardroom and advocate for continued or increased investment. So a lot of this is, how do you take the brand side of media and make that transparent, accountable, measurable? How do you instill the same confidence in the upper funnel as you do in the low funnel? How do we make sure that that's paying off for the business in the right way and driving the right types of outcomes? There's also pressure to do more with less. So as the economy is tightening, media budgets are being reduced, and there seems to be this built-in expectation that marketers will be okay because we have the faculties of AI and advanced analytics, and we can just make that work harder so we can deliver potentially even the same or better outcomes with fewer dollars invested. And of course, there are plenty of cases where that's possible, but again, it just forces us to step up the measurement rigor and make sure that we're getting all of that right to even have a fighting chance of accomplishing this more with less. And we're doing all of that in a landscape where we're also faced with signal loss. So this is happening from tightening privacy regulations and browser technology changes like cookie deprecation. So I talked about 10 years back when Kuhn and I first started working together. That was really a space where multi-touch attribution was all the rage, and you would just track every single touch point, every click, every impression of an ad, and you could stitch all of that together for an individual user and see their path. You can't do that anymore. It doesn't work. No matter how much you invest in technology, the browsers are not going to let it happen. Potentially even the laws are not going to allow that to happen. So we have to think more about statistical forms of measurement as becoming much more dominant. So, with all of that in mind, our general advice is you have to think about adopting multiple forms of measurement to triangulate truth. There's no one mechanism here that's going to do it all for you. It's about the different forms of measurement working together collaboratively. And we're going to look at some real business questions and real business scenarios that we can address with different combinations of these things. We do think a really great starting point for most businesses is to get a foundation in MMM. Uh, your first MMM, we call it a foundational MMM because it's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be the model that immediately leads to a great scenario planner. But that first pass is going to help you figure out where you have some testing gaps, where maybe you need to test with a little bit more intentionality to figure out the true value of a channel. So then we get into iterating with an intentional testing framework. So really, we want to set up a learning agenda and a test plan for a business that spans over 1 or 2 years, where we're putting specific tests in market that are helping us better understand channel and audience and geo behaviors that we need to tune to ultimately get toward a more robust model and a more robust scenario planner. And if we've done all of that effectively, then hopefully we can validate some truly meaningful leading indicators. So we're going to talk about fast moving data versus slow moving data. And often you have to manage your media toward the fast moving signals, like, say, website visitation or people engaging with key content or whatever those end up being, those KPIs that we come to demonstrate and trust will correctly impact the true business performance when evaluated in the context of that larger and longer term model. So we'll talk a little bit about how we put all of this together. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kuhn to make it real.
Thank you, Robert. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, are we good?
Yep.
Also, thanks for the kind intro. Sorry I was late. It's funny. My computer decided to do a restart during that gap right before we started, but I made it in time. So thank you. Okay. Measurement can feel complicated. It can sound intimidating. Robert was saying, we got to rely on statistical methods, and there's a whole new host of platforms and tools that offer more and more sophisticated measurement solutions. But it's good to kind of cut through that noise. And to be quite frank, underneath all of it, there is a beating heart of simplicity in what these tools actually do. And so one of the big goals for today is to just kind of cut through the noise and get some plain English definitions with like not too much jargon and sort of hopefully give you a sense of what the essence of some of these methods are. And each of these methods, they have their time and place and their strengths and weaknesses. So gonna walk through some of the blind spots there. And then, once you got a bit of a foundational understanding, you can know when a specific tool satisfies a specific business question that comes up. And I mean, I'm just going to set the stage. There's not one perfect method. The goal is not to get to one perfect, precise um, idea of what a media channel is contributing, incrementally or otherwise. It's just decision-making support. So again, just you want to come away with something. It's like, okay, what tools help us answer what questions, and why using the wrong one in the wrong context might give you something a bit misleading. Okay, three major buckets here, and this one slide kind of just says it all. You can ask a question like, "What's our ROI on a channel?" And on the surface, it's one question, but in different contexts and in different situations, that same question can mean very different things. So if you're stepping back out and you're like, okay, what's the ideal mix of all the channels that we're doing? That's a different ROI question about setting the quarterly budget versus like, why did we see a lift in sales? What was the campaign that kind of drove that? Which is a bit more of a causal question. Again, same ROI underneath, but the context is entirely different. And for a lot of the people in our agency who are in the trenches optimizing media, what's a good ROI on something is quite different, and that's sort of operational tuning down to the campaign level. So the same question, sort of framed differently, each of these contexts deserve a different tool. And that's kind of one of the mistakes that some people make when they um, think they have to bet on one horse to answer that broad general question. And that really doesn't work. And that's where your measurement program can kind of fall apart. Okay, so this is sort of the main map. MMM, marketing mix modeling, or media mix modeling. I'll get into the definitions of all of this stuff. That is the big picture. Oh, sorry. I think I moved slides. It's having a mind of its own. Okay, sorry. Um, MMM then, this is the big planning tool. You want to understand where to invest next, what what types of channels are winning. That's the planning instrument. Incrementality, I will get to, which is uh, kind of the gold standard of the scientific method. And this is actually the closest to measuring a causality in whether marketing actually created lift. And finally, like Robert was saying, back in the day, MTA or multi-touch attribution, that was like where everybody wanted, where you had full observability into what was happening, especially in the digital world and all the touch points. Um, and I'll walk into that as well. Ideally, you can use all three, and they don't necessarily compete against each other. You're not necessarily a incrementality shop or an MMM type company. They again answer fundamentally different questions. Um, so I'll walk through a little bit of each. So more specifically in terms of the practical questions that might come up, it's like, should we be pushing a bit more upper funnel? Should we move our money to a particular channel? Are we putting too much in that channel? Is it saturated? Like, what's the right mix? And does that vary by region? These are allocation questions, and that's a whole category. The next is, did this TV actually do anything? What would happen if we just stopped dumping all of our money into Meta for a particular type of tactic? Those types of questions, those are classic incrementality questions, and they sort of require a causal answer, and they don't really get satisfied with the correlative approach from the planning types of questions. And then again, did this creative work? What's our best creative? Which is the best audience? This week, what should we do differently because we saw some action in a certain type of campaign sets? So that's a multi-touch attribution category. And as Robert talked about, it's sort of a spectrum from left to right of slow data to fast data. And I'll get into some details about that. But the day-to-day optimization, that's the observable stuff that's down in high granularity. So a CMO could ask a question about budget allocation. A media buyer is asking about which little tactic or audience to scale. So again, the tool has to match the question. And yeah, and if you put the wrong tool to the wrong context, you're going to have a wrong result. Okay, so now for some detail. MMM, marketing mix modeling. Some people call it media mix modeling. It really doesn't matter. But this is the planning instrument. It's not what ad won, it's something a bit broader in timescale. And so we'll cover what it is, what it's good at, what you get, what data needs to be satisfied to make it actually work. And we'll talk through some limitations. Okay. MMM is basically a model, a predictive model that is based on historical data, and it is about your media inputs in the past, and it gives you a sense of what those media activities did to some outcome that you care about, so a result. It's for those who a regression model. It's sort of like a computer deciding on what a good equation is to describe all of that activity. So you put in your spend on your different media channels, you consider seasonal aspects of your business. A good data set factors in, if you ran a promotion at a particular time, or if there's a downturn in the economy that really explained a dip in performance. So create a whole picture of all of these channels, and you kind of look at the model will look at how these channels work together. So they're not individually isolated. So the explanation of your performance is sort of distributed across all of your media channels. So, TV might be pushing the needle in some way downstream and lifting your social, but if it ends up in performance increases, a media mix model can see that. So, and one of the outcomes of an MMM is it can indicate what the best mix is going forward. It does this on an aggregate. Okay, so that's the big point. And it's not down to these individual campaign levels. One of the things that's great about MMM is it's privacy proof. Because it's aggregated, we don't need any granular detail. We don't need user level tracking. We don't need any of that. It works across all sorts of channels. It's been around for decades and decades and decades. Not a microscope. It's something that you step back and you look at from a distance to see what channel mixes are performing the best. Okay, so it's great at budget allocation, like I said. It is great at understanding, if a TV buy is helping increase some of these performance outcomes, and it looks at sort of the marginal contributions of each channel. It gives you a sense of what a channel is doing in terms of lift, which is great. Um, it's not, it's a bit more directional, but it gives you a sense of confidence that a channel is working. One of the best things about MMMs is, again, it's not tied to user clickstream data, so it plays nicely with traditional media, online and offline conversions, things like that, that don't have to have a tracking pattern, connecting all the dots. So it's probably the only model in the toolkit that sees everything. And the model is as strong as the data that you put in. So if you have a rich data set that has a good purview into a lot of aspects of your business, um, the MMM sees all, and it will help you make the best broad decision. Okay. We don't need to get into the statistics of it. Usually these are operated by data scientists or organizations that have tools that execute this. Basically, at the end of the day, these models produce a set of standardized outputs. They're graphs and equations that are very, very interpretable. It tells you what your sales, what contributed to your sales by channel. And in a lot of cases, it's just the brand value. And then on top of it could be, 10% of your sales were attributed to your paid media. So that's one of the big deliverables that comes out of it. There's a couple of different techniques. This is sort of statistical, but one of the methods, and this is one that we use at our agency, it's a Bayesian approach where it actually gives you like a range of confidence. So it doesn't say exactly like this channel drove 4.7% incremental sales. It'll give you a little bit of a range between them, which gives you sort of a confidence in how that channel's performing. A really great output of MMMs are response curves. So this is sort of like a saturation where you can say the amount of money you put into a channel is not linearly related to an outcome. Often it's on a curve. So your spend has some diminishing returns at a point. So the model actually handles all of that beautifully, which is great. The model also understands, lag effects on certain media. It captures a lot of technical details to make an overall conclusion strong. And at the end of the day, it gives you an optimal mix. Or a suggestion of where you should slide money from one channel to the next in a given constrained budget. Okay. You can't just out of the box run an MMM. I mean, there's some platforms that say you can, and Robert was saying a foundational MMM is great. You can get hit the ground running pretty quickly. But even then, it has some sort of minimum requirements. Ideally, 2 years of data in channels. That way, you can capture with confidence the seasonal cycles of your business. So spends and some outcome variable across 2 years of data minimum by channel. Uh, Weekly data is typically the standard. So, and I know not all channels and some of the unique media buys out there, you only get um, reports or spends that happen in different time grains, but ideally weekly, that's kind of the standard. And this is a bit of a statistical point, but if you spent flat in every channel across time, and the model then can't detect when one channel is doing a bit more work than the other, you're not going to have a strong model. So it's just very, very helpful that you have some variability in your spend. Otherwise, the model's not going to detect impact. So think about it, it's sort of like running a good experiment. You wouldn't give somebody the same sort of treatment or medication of 5 different pills at the same amount across time. You want a little bit of variation so we can detect changes. Um, so yeah, and one of the things that MMM is not good at is it's not good at understanding the impact of a brand new channel because you do have sort of this historical data requirement. Okay, so yeah, to conclude, it's not a microscope. That's I think the big takeaway here. It's not going to tell you how to tactically run your media. It's going to do something at a really high level. Number two is it's correlative. So it's a regression model. It's an equation that tries to explain what's going on in your data. And sometimes you have some causal mistakes. So for example, if you advertise right before a natural seasonal spike, the model really wouldn't know that it's a natural seasonal spike as opposed to the spend. So you have sort of a correlation causation problem that you're a little bit at risk. So again, variability in your data is great to mitigate that, but it it's vulnerable in that respect. And again, this one's a big one. Entering something like TikTok for the first time, MMM is not going to help you out too much there. You're going to have to look at a different strategy for measurement to understand if that channel is working. Um, and it's nice and fine to say that a channel contributed X%, but again, it's a range. It's a range of equation fit. So you have to look at it sort of as a directional bundle of possibility of impact as opposed to like an exact science on what the precise number is. Okay, you do need to be a bit skilled to operate some of this stuff. There are open source frameworks like we at our agency build on some of the best in class, which are open source Python products from both Google and Meta. There are specialized firms that will help you work through all of this stuff. So um, that's kind of, you have options in terms of trying to do it in-house with data science people. There's measurement partners that actually specialize in some platforms that get you there. And then, yeah, there's the open source platforms as well. So it's something that you should update a couple times a year. Context change, the model gets old, it rots. It's a bit of a living tool. So if you're going to rely on MMM, it is a bit of a lifestyle commitment in a way. Okay. Okay, let's check. This is the second sort of tool in the toolbox, and this is the incrementality testing. So this is like the proof stuff. This is where you can really, in our opinion, trust whether a channel or a tactic is doing work and it is the most scientific. Um, and yeah, it tells you, is this tactic or whatever incrementally changing our business and how much? And this is how it works. Okay. Okay, so basically, scientific method, it's a test control. Really, that's at the essence of what incrementality testing is. You treat a group and you compare it against a group that was not treated and you measure the difference. And that's basically it. It's not a correlation thing in the same way. It's not something that a platform conversion is saying that you got. It's an actual experiment that you ran because you changed some spend. It's kind of the gold standard. Um, and it works without privacy user level tracking. You can do this on aggregate as well, which is great. So it's privacy safe. It's the one tool that actually tries to isolate cause and effect. So there's a few ways to do it that we work with. One of them is like a holdout test. This is probably the most common. So you have a group, you show this group ads, you don't show another group ads, and the difference is the lift. So in certain platforms, like I know some of the larger spending accounts, Google will administer this right in the platform where they do the A/B test and show some people ads and show some people not ads, and we understand these two groups, and you can measure um, the difference in performance. There's also, platform lift studies that some of these big media providers can offer you, which is a great way to get visibility into this incrementality. A really common one that we do is geographic testing, because it kind of intuitively makes sense. You want to isolate a group, usually around uh, potentially a store footprint or some sort of population that you feel represents your general business community. And so you run ads in some markets, you don't run those ads in other markets, and you compare the outcomes. And so again, powerful. They don't depend on user level tracking. It's an aggregate statistical analysis, and you can measure for real statistical significance. Okay. So just a couple of simple examples. You can suppress showing ads in certain areas, and then you measure it to a control. One of the things that we do, and this is a little bit statistical and complicated, instead of doing a classic match market test, we do like this synthetic control. So that means we'll treat a group, and instead of having a city or a geography that doesn't get the treatment, we assemble it using data to sort of take the DNA of all these other places that combine to make sort of a digital twin or a twin of the test market. So it's sort of like an apples to apples thing, and then we measure the lift. So it's not exactly the most intuitive, but statistically, it's the strongest method. So any statistician will help you with measuring incrementality lift using that technique. It's a completely respected practice. And then there's the classic geo test. You can't do holdouts on these granular things on something like TV, so you do a geographic test and you go dark in one place and it's on in the other. You keep it running for X weeks and you see what the impact is on something like store visits. And again, within the ecosystem, these brain lift studies from the major platform providers, they give you a great indication of whether a channel is providing incremental lift. Okay, so if you really want proof and you don't believe the correlation of perhaps an MMM incrementality is like that's the way to do it. It is not just directional. It kind of gives you a little bit of a quantitative lift. And also, if you're thinking about a big spend decision, you could pilot a media channel, see if it is driving incremental lift. It's a sort of a lower stakes way to prove out a channel, and then you can scale it afterwards. Um, so it's a very, very strong method, but it's not perfect. One, you need to run a test that has enough change that we can trust it statistically. So you might not always get this test, and if you have to run it in a bigger group, then something like a holdout, then there's an operational risk of losing performance or money and wasting opportunity because you're not running media that maybe works. Um, Another problem, and we've encountered this, is you need ideally a stable environment to test. So if you're running an experiment, but you're still optimizing media and pulling all kinds of levers, then it's not a really good test. So, or you really feel like you want to run a promotion because a competitor is doing something and their test is running. It's a really easy way to contaminate results. So you need a little bit of discipline here. And tests they take time, they take effort. They're not just running on historical data, so there's an expense associated with this operationally. So that's sort of one of the downsides. Um, they're third-party platforms. We worked with some in the past, like Measured was a great one where they have some pretty cool technology where they have embedded synthetic control groups. They have a library of previous tests from their other clients that show that they can build on to build statistical significance. So it's really great. Um, there's platform native stuff, like I mentioned, and there's actually open source packages. Meta has an amazing one called GeoLift, which does make it quite easy to enter the world of incrementality testing and seeing what the geographic impact is. So yeah, okay. Finally, MTA. So this is kind of the way that we used to do it, and this is multi-touch attribution, and it's the best for the tactical operational day-to-day world. And it's about assigning credit fundamentally to a sale across all the touch points that were observed in a conversion. So it's a sale happens, we know that an ad was clicked here and a visit happened there, and so on. And so these four touch points each get a piece of the pie of the credit, and then we get distributed that way. And there's different techniques on how you distribute it, but ultimately it's observable, it's trackable, it rolls up to a certain number. This is like how we operate with last click attribution, generally in out of the box reporting. Um, but it doesn't see the full picture, it only sees what is tracked. Okay. So like I said, a customer could see an ad, it could get an email, it could visit a website and then purchase. And the multi-touch attribution model tries to assign credit to each of these touch points. There's these systems called rule-based, where last click, for example, gets the entire credit. There's first touch. There's linear, where everybody gets equally. There's these U-shaped and J-shaped, and there's a bunch of different approaches to this. There's algorithmic, which gets a little bit more into the modeling side. So it does some calculations to assign fractional attribution. So yeah, it's limited by cookies, it's limited by platforms. So it's useful, but it's not complete. And it tells you, though, if it is tracked, what campaigns are doing better, what audiences, what creatives are getting the most are contributing the most to the outcomes we care about. So this is like quite useful, although incomplete. It's very useful in day-to-day optimization, especially if you're comparing something like a trackable media channel campaign against another campaign within a platform. So relatively, this is great to say that this campaign is actually outperforming that campaign. Let's switch budget. Okay. GA4 is great for this. It's Google Analytics. It looks at like converting journeys and non-converting journeys, and it studies the paths that like led to a sale or an outcome that you care about. And then it can programmatically sort of assign what the incremental importance of every subsequent touch point is. Um, and it can kind of tell you the difference between good converting paths and poor converting paths. So you can keep that last click attribution, which typically we report on. You can kind of have that relative view of um, what your performance looks like when the credit is distributed across these different channels. So it's kind of like it's nice to look at this as just sort of a layer deeper beyond the last click. Again, it's only what GA4 sees. So if somebody's watching TV ads and stuff like that, that's not a part of MTA. Um, okay, so yeah, it's partially visible. Switching between devices, it's not always the best. Safari is a real problem with its policies. So, the cross-device identity that we used to be able to track, it's not the same in privacy regulations. And Apple tracking has really changed the signals. So we're kind of over time seeing less and less and less of the picture, which still, it doesn't mean that MTA's not to be looked at entirely. It's the best we can do, especially when you're optimizing within a channel that you can see. So don't necessarily use it as a source of truth. Definitely don't use it for cross-budget allocations, especially if you're advertising in non-observable channels. Use MMM for that. But it's sort of, yeah, just think of MTA as a nice partner to deal with the operational day-to-day of managing media. Okay, so like I said, like Robert was saying at the beginning, it's very, very, very dependent on what your question is, and then you choose the tool next. So I think that is up to management. It's up to what goals you want to achieve and what you want to achieve with your teams. So that needs to be crystal clear. So if it's a really truly a budget allocation problem, open the door to MMM. If it's proving something, did this actually work? Do we trust that investing in TV is a good thing? Um, incrementality. That's the way to do it. Um, if you want to play with creative and dabble with like some campaign settings, and that's the world that you're living in to try and drive and move the needle, that is without a doubt the multi-touch attribution. So yeah, it's really about understanding your question, getting it really clear and down on paper, and then it becomes very obvious what tools will support. Okay, this is something that comes up in our work quite often, which is um, you can open the door to each of these methods, and sometimes they just don't agree, like they contradict each other. So MMM is saying Facebook's great, put money into it, but your incrementality test was showing that um, it's completely overstated. And an MTA might just say paid search gets all the credit. So one of the the core things again, it comes back to this question is like if there's a disagreement, you might want to look at whether or not the question that you're trying to answer is consistent across all three. So if you're saying MMM is giving me information about particular tactical moves, uh, they both can kind of be true if it's contradicted in another measurement framework. So you don't necessarily have to force them to agree. Um, so that's an important point. Another point is sometimes the timescales matter. MMM, remember, it's a 2-year horizon that's looking at all the patterns and all the seasons to get an understanding of how a channel's doing. Incrementality is looking at sort of a narrow, recent um, experiment that you've run, and multi-touch attribution is potentially in the last week. So different timescales, different conditions, they have the capacity to disagree with each other. And so again, you need to come back to these bigger, broader questions to help reconcile all of this stuff. And it's nice to look at like a hierarchy. Incrementality is the gold standard. It generally kind of wins. It's an experiment. So I kind of put that at the top of the hierarchy of trusting. MMM, it's bigger picture, it's comprehensive, it uh, accounts for all the possible changes that could happen in the future because you're looking at such a large time scale. So that's probably next down the line in terms of what to trust. And MTA, it sees the least, it's fast, it's tactical, it's possibly, you know, further down the list if you're not doing something tactically, uh, if the context isn't exactly tactical. So that's why it's nice to have a few of these tools. Tension between them is good. You can be inspired to do new tests. You get new hypotheses. You have great fodder for your analysts to dig deep into why these methods are disagreeing. Find new sources. Look at competitors. Look at uh, expanding the purview of what you're analyzing. So it's not necessarily a bad thing that these methods disagree. Okay, so just as a starting point, everybody is used to platform reporting, last click attribution. That's kind of where we're all starting. It's just totally fine. Um, it's pretty easy if you're on a platform like GA, or an equivalent. You can quickly just turn on and look at your multi-touch attribution to see if there's big swings in your reporting. Um, And testing can happen very, very quickly without a lot of without a huge barrier of entry in terms of skill set. And there's a lot of tools online that can help you kind of walk through that and analyze the results. And then finally, like MMM, this is a bigger project. This is requires a little bit of know-how, otherwise, and it's a bit risky. If you don't know what you're doing, you might end up believing a model that is just not very good or complete, has poor fit. So yeah, I would say just as a practical steps, like look at where you're going, check out your attribution settings in GA4, like understand your conversion windows and see if you're overstating your conversions or it's a certain platform is claiming it's doing a lot. Like this is something that you can start to analyze immediately. Um, and then, I mean, really, it's about articulating what questions leadership wants answered, and if it is something like budget allocation. Um,
Um,
sorry.
sorry,
We're
we're
getting a
getting a
little
little
bit of feedback.
feedback.
Yeah, it's
It's
okay.
okay.
Nearly.
Nearly.
And then yeah, the bigger bets are incrementality, MMM, integrating all this stuff. So that's sort of a longer term horizon, but you can start immediately. And then, document where you are, what you're currently doing, have a deep understanding of where you are and what the gaps are. And then, I think definitely launching and exploring running some media tests that it's a high value activity. You can look into platform lift studies through some of the platforms like Google and Meta. That's something that's available quite readily. And then it's neat when these things start connecting and interacting. So an incrementality finding might give you constraints for your MMM, or your MMM might tell you that this one channel is really is contributing a lot, but your MTA doesn't really suggest. So you're like, oh, hey, maybe connected TV is doing a ton. We should run an incrementality test on that channel. So um, they start to feed off of each other, and you start building a nice measurement ecosystem that just strengthens with time. So yeah, it really comes down to coming up with the right questions, and pairing that with the right method. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. That was super interesting. I have a few questions. If anybody, I don't see any questions in chat, but if you've got any questions, please uh, start typing them in now. I'll ask a couple of questions I've got while we're here. I guess the big one for me, and I know you've touched on this conversation before, but like or during the presentation, I think the big one is like just in for most people, you have access to these tools like digital media. Most people are now like the average percent spend, I think, on digital platforms of all media is something in the 50 to 60% range. And the lion's share of that is going to say Google and Facebook. So most people are using one of those two channels, and there's all these different measurements in this inside of those tools. So we're really familiar with these data sets that are coming and data that's puking at us by the second. Um, and so I guess the question I have is how problematic is it for you to just rely on that data for your measurement? It's kind of reverse of what your argument was, I guess.
Can
How
I, uh,
go? Yeah, Robert, this is all you.
I would just start with a high level one, and then I'll want Kun to chime in from a more technical perspective as well. But so uh, both both Google and Meta we have to think of as full funnel platforms, right? They may have
Hmm.
started more in the performance media space where
Sure.
you get great attribution off a last click and it would drive an immediate outcome. But as we think about the expansion that they've done over many years into brand media, awareness driving media, like you can just run reach focused video on Facebook and you're not going to
Sure.
get a great click through outcome from that. And so I find it really telling that these are the two biggest players in digital media, the two probably most insular walled gardens, and they have both released their own open source media mix models. So Google's got
Hmm.
Meridian and Meta has Robin. And that's just very telling to me that even these platforms recognize that the only way to truly value media you can buy from them is to do that with a media mix model and not with
Yeah,
a click
interesting.
or MTA.
Yeah. The idea of and then just to pick on last click a little bit more. Oh, there's one from John. I'll go to this. So traditionally, MMM was the mainly valuable for enterprise level advertisers. New approaches claim that to make it usable for smaller clients as well. In your experience, what is the realistic spend floor where MMM starts to become useful around 20K, 50K, or higher per month? And more broadly, how viable is MMM for SMBs?
Yeah, great question. Are we talking total spend across all channels? Because 20K a
Yeah,
month might be like, I
yeah. Let's
think,
just say that's a budget that you have.
yeah, I I have seen some poor statistical blips when a channel is just doing 10,000 a couple times a year. It's not enough to really move the needle relative to what the business outcome variable you're tracking. Like three to $500,000 a year is kind of like, yeah, I think
Hmm.
it's doable. I would say you could definitely just turn over that stone for yeah, $300,000 to $500,000 budget for a couple of channels to see if there's a lift. It's
Hmm.
quite different if it's distributed across a lot of channels. And there's some
Hmm.
techniques to maybe, or you might, yeah, there's some techniques to try and reduce the noise around that, but it's not the best for a small to medium business that's not spending at least a few $100,000 a year.
I would just say as well, it probably it depends very much on the baseline size of the business because for a small business that's just getting started, 20K a month is actually a pretty strong media budget, and you would be able to observe lift
Hmm.
through some of these forms of measurement. If not MMM, then certainly incrementality, because basically anything you would run should show lift if the
Hmm.
business is small. We get into more of a concern if the business has a really strong baseline and then
Hmm.
you're making a media investment that is small relative to that
Hmm.
existing
Ah,
sort of
right.
momentum.
Yeah. Yes. 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 Sorry. Of course. Yeah. It's relative to the business, but if it's not a big budget and it's not detectable in terms of its on a time series, if it's not showing some sort of variability and it's just these
Hmm.
little tiny spends for a particular channel, it's really, really tough to see um, meaningful lift on an outcome variable like revenue. But
Yeah. Um, Probably just have time for one or two more questions. If anybody has another question, please jump in. I'll just throw this one out at you. So I love the points that you were making about matching asking the question first, and then figuring out the tools. And similarly, I guess the question is kind of relative to what I'm about to say, but like the idea of prove it to a CFO, and maybe that's kind of where the question goes. Like, how do you prove the ROI of this kind of investment? It's it's like I think it's an interesting conversation because you're talking, I think, at that point about incrementality and not about like click-through rates or the things that are
Mhm.
easily accessible. And so from a planning perspective, I know you had some of those testing outlines. Can you just talk a little bit about how important it is not just to present data that's available versus data that you have to work on to get to be able to build out that testing plan and prove it to the CFO?
Yeah, Robert, do you want to? I can speak a little bit to. First of all, I would say stuff like click-through rates and engagement metrics, they don't necessarily prove value. That I would just say out of the gates, that's more a tactical thing on whether or not an ad's working well. It's not
Hmm.
necessarily if it's driving the bottom line.
Right.
So if you're in the prove to me this channel works, the gold standard would be incrementality testing. MMM can kind of look back historically to say if something that you've just had faith that a channel is something you
Right.
always wanted to do. This is like that's a perfect case of all right, let's just run an MMM to see if like your gut of running t radio for a certain um, cadence over time. Historically, yeah, proving some impact and historically MMM, proving whether a channel is doing something when it may be getting a free ride from some other channel.
Yeah.
That's an incrementality test. Robert, what would you say?
That's a real problem. Yeah, I would say one of the biggest problems of our industry is that this sort of click-based in-platform measurement feels more real, like especially if you're trying to go to a CFO and get money, is people are really anchored in that to be able to say this campaign drove this number of conversions at this kind of ROAS, so we should spend more to fund that. And I would argue the biggest shift we need to make is that we should have more confidence in incrementality testing than we should in those types of measures. Even though those measures feel like a really hard direct connection, they're not
Hmm.
telling the full picture where a statistical form of measurement like incrementality testing actually is. So if you can learn to trust the statistical or the probabilistic measurement more than the platform numbers, I think that's just a much better way to chart a course for the business.
I would say there's a change management issue here, and we've
Yeah.
encountered this where if last year you were reporting that the channel did well and you have a whole bunch of metrics and benchmarks that were in a simpler method,
Hmm.
moving to something like an incremental lift of a channel is can sometimes be such a big delta that
Hmm.
is scary.
Hmm.
And you don't trust it. You just don't trust it out of habit.
And
So
the
Hmm.
story is often opposite. It's like you're spending so much money for years in something like retargeting, and then you run an incrementality study, and it says, well, actually, that 16 ROAS is actually a 0.7.
Yeah.
Well, how do we tell our CFO
Whoops.
that?
exactly. Yeah, that's a whoopsie
Interesting.
doopsie. Um,
Guys, this has been awesome. Thanks so much for your time and your expertise on the topic. It's such a fascinating topic, and I love the idea of just pairing measurement to the right question. Well, asking the right question first of all, but then finding the right tools to do that. So thanks for some of the insights, and appreciate all of you for joining us today and throughout the week. And that's it for Media and Martech Week. And so thanks again to the Alberta Magazine Association, Producers Association, and super happy to have you guys all here. Thank you.
Thank you,
pleasure.
everyone. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.